The scent of truffle and saffron drifted through Le Petit Jardin's dining room, but all I could taste was bile rising in my throat. There sat Karen and Tom, preening at my reserved table like vultures who'd claimed fresh carrion. The maitre d' wrung his hands, avoiding my gaze as he stammered through his fourth apology. I'm Elsie, and this was supposed to be my moment. The restaurant's grand opening had been circled on my calendar for months. My review could make or break this place, and everyone in the industry knew it. Everyone except my dear in-laws, apparently, who were now sampling the amuse-bouche meant for me. "Oh, Elsie, darling," Karen's voice carried across the room like a razor wrapped in silk. "What a delightful surprise. We had no idea you'd be here tonight." Liar. Mark shifted beside me, his hand finding the small of my back. A gesture meant to comfort, but it felt like a brand of ownership, his parents' ownership. "Mother, that table was reserved for Elsie's review," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It always did when he confronted them. "Nonsense, dear. The maitre d' assured us this was the best table in the house. Perfect for celebrating our anniversary." Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, your little food blog can wait, can it?" "It's not a blog," I said through gritted teeth. "I write for the Metropolitan Review." Tom looked up from his wine glass, his expression carefully blank. "Ah, yes, those little restaurant articles. Karen, didn't you mention something about them at Bridge Club?" "Oh, that's right." Karen dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Margaret's daughter just started a food blog, too. How lovely that everyone can be a critic these days." The maitre d' cleared his throat. "Madame, we can prepare another table." "That won't be necessary." I turned on my heel, my Louboutins clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. Behind me, I heard Mark making excuses, always making excuses. The night air hit my face, and I gulped it down like expensive wine. My phone buzzed, my sister Lily's name flashing on the screen. "Tell me you destroyed them," she said when I answered. "They won this round." I watched through the window as Mark settled into a chair at his parents' table. "But they just gave me a reason to go to war." "What are you going to do?" I spotted Derek across the street, camera in hand. He'd been planning to photograph the dishes for my review. Now he was capturing something far more interesting. Karen slipping what looked like an envelope to the maitre d'. "I'm going to find out exactly how deep their manipulation goes," I said, watching Derek work. "And then I'm going to serve it back to them, course by course, until they choke on it." "Elsie," Lily's voice softened. "Are you sure? This is Mark's family we're talking about." Through the window, I saw Karen raise her wine glass in my direction, that same cold smile playing on her lips. Mark didn't even look up. "No," I said. "This is my career, my life, and my reputation they're trying to destroy, and I'm done letting them." I ended the call and texted Derek, "Get everything." His response came quickly. "Already on it. You won't believe what I just saw." I took one last look through the window. The scene was perfect. The warm lighting, the elegant table settings, the happy family enjoying their meal. But I knew better now. Every feast has its rotten core, and I was about to expose this one. My phone buzzed again. "Mark, coming home soon?" I typed back, "Working late. Don't wait up." It wasn't exactly a lie. I had work to do, just not the kind he was thinking of. As I walked away from Le Petit Jardin, I could still taste the bile in my throat, but now it was mixed with something else. Determination. And maybe just a hint of revenge. The numbers on my laptop screen blurred together as I scrolled through our joint account statements. 3,000 here, 5,000 there, all transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. My fingers trembled as I traced each transaction back to its source. "More wine?" Mark appeared behind me, bottle hovering over my empty glass. I slammed the laptop shut. "Where did the money from the Riverside property go?" The bottle froze mid-pour. "What?" "The rental income. It should be nearly 40,000 by now, but the account's almost empty." Mark set the bottle down, his movements careful, measured. "Mother's been handling those properties since before we married. She knows what she's doing. That's our money, Mark, our investment. She's just reinvesting it, making it work harder for us." He wouldn't meet my eyes. You know how good she is with these things. I pulled up the statement again. Then explain these transfers to Le Petit Jardin, $10,000 in the past month alone. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking why your mother is moving our money around without consulting us. The doorbell rang, saving Mark from responding. Lily burst in, her yoga mat tucked under one arm, face flushed from exercise. You would not believe the gossip I just heard it. She stopped short, reading the room. Bad time? Perfect time, I said, turning the laptop toward her. Tell me if this looks normal to you. Lily squinted at the screen, her expression darkening. Holy shit, Els. Is this why Karen's been telling everyone at the country club that you're having financial troubles? The wine glass shattered in my grip, red spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. She's what? At bridge club yesterday, I overheard her telling Margaret that you've been borrowing money to keep up appearances. That's why you've been writing such glowing reviews lately, to get free meals. Mark stepped forward. That's ridiculous. Mother would never... Like she would never take our table at Le Petit Jardin? I cut in. Like she would never manipulate our finances? You're paranoid, he said, but his voice wavered. She's trying to help us. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Got those photos developed. You need to see this now. I have to go. I grabbed my keys, ignoring Mark's protests. Lily followed me to the door. Want company? I shook my head. Stay with him. Make sure he doesn't warn them. Derek's studio smelled of developer fluid and coffee. He spread the photos across his workbench, Karen at Le Petit Jardin handing something to the maître d'. But it was the other photos that made my blood run cold. Karen at 5 different restaurants. Always the same routine. Private conversations, envelopes changing hands, meaningful looks. There's more, Derek said, pulling up his laptop. Every restaurant where she's been spotted has published a negative review of your work within a week. Anonymous comments, social media posts, all questioning your credibility. She's systematically destroying my reputation, while using your own money to do it. Derek pulled up more bank statements. These restaurants? All showing deposits matching the withdrawals from your account. My phone buzzed again. Mark. Mother and father are coming for dinner tomorrow. We need to talk about this. I showed Derek the message. He whistled low. Perfect timing. Want me to dig deeper before they arrive? No. I gathered the photos, a plan forming. I want you to teach me how to set up hidden cameras. If they're coming to dinner, let's give them a show they won't forget. Elsie. Derek's voice held a warning. Once you start down this road... They started this road, I said, studying Karen's smug face in the photos. I'm just going to make sure they reach the end of it. My phone buzzed one more time. Lily. Mark's on the phone with Karen. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. I looked at Derek. How quickly can you get those cameras set up? He grinned, already reaching for his equipment bag. How does tonight sound? The game was changing. Karen thought she could buy my silence with my own money, destroy my reputation with whispered lies. But she forgot one crucial detail. I review restaurants for a living. I know exactly how to serve someone their just desserts. The hidden camera feed flickered on my phone as Karen dabbed her mouth with a napkin, every movement precise and calculated. My dining room had become an observation deck, and I was watching predators at work. The ossobuco is divine, Elsie. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Almost as good as the one at Castellanos, though I heard they're having some difficulties lately. I gripped my fork tighter. Castellanos, my favorite restaurant for honest reviews, had just fired their head chef after anonymous complaints about food safety. The timing wasn't coincidental. Speaking of difficulties, Tom cleared his throat. We've been hearing concerning things about your work, dear. Have you? I kept my voice steady, watching Karen's hand disappear beneath the table. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification, another transfer from our account. Derek's text appeared. Got it. 3 more restaurants confirmed. Same pattern. Several restaurateurs have mentioned... Karen paused, selecting her words like weapons. Inconsistencies in your reviews, favoritism, perhaps even some ethical breaches. Mark's head snapped up. Mother, we're only concerned, darling. Karen reached across, patting his hand. After all, the family reputation. Your reputation? The words escaped before I could stop them. Like your reputation at Le Petit Jardin? The room temperature seemed to drop. Tom's fork clattered against his plate. I don't know what you're implying, Karen said, but her fingers twitched toward her purse. I pulled out the photos Derek had taken, spreading them across the table like a royal flush. Funny how every restaurant you visited lately has published anonymous complaints about me. Even funnier how they all received payments matching withdrawals from our account. Mark grabbed one of the photos, his face draining of color. Mother, what is this? It's called protecting family, Karen snapped, her facade cracking. Your wife's reviews were becoming a liability. Her independence, her refusal to consider our social standing. So you decided to destroy my career? I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. Use our money to bribe restaurants into discrediting me? You never understood your place, Karen hissed, rising to meet me. In this family, in this society, you needed to learn. Karen. Tom's warning came too late. Learn what? That you've been manipulating everything? That you've got your hook so deep in Mark he can't even see what you're doing? Elsie, please. Mark reached for me, but I stepped back. No, show him, Derek. The dining room TV flickered to life, displaying security footage from various restaurants. Karen methodically working her way through the city's finest establishments, spreading her poison about me one envelope at a time. You've been following me? Karen's voice shook with rage. You taught me well about protection, about family. I leaned forward, dropping my voice. About revenge. This is absurd. Karen grabbed her purse. Tom, we're leaving. Mark. But Mark wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the latest bank statement I'd placed before him, showing transfers to his own private account, ones he hadn't made. You've been accessing my personal account? His voice was barely a whisper. Karen froze. Everything I did was for you, to protect you from her influence. Get out. The words came from Mark, surprising us all. Darling, get out. They left, Karen's heels clicking like tiny explosions on our hardwood floor. The door slammed, leaving silence thick enough to choke on. Mark stood by the window, his shoulders rigid. How long have you known? About the restaurants? 2 weeks? About everything else? I'm still discovering the extent of it. He turned and I saw something break behind his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me over her? The question hung between us like smoke. My phone buzzed again, Derek sending more evidence, more betrayals to uncover. But watching Mark's face, I realized this victory tasted different than I'd imagined. What happens now? He asked. I looked at the scattered photos, the bank statements, the evidence of a carefully constructed life being dismantled. Now we find out how deep this really goes. The question is, are you ready to see the truth? Mark picked up one of the photos. Karen at his office building, dated months ago. His hand trembled slightly. I don't know, he said honestly. But I need to. I nodded, already composing a message to Derek. Karen thought she was protecting her family's reputation. She didn't realize she was about to become the biggest scandal this city's dining scene had ever tasted. And I was just getting started. The anonymous comment appeared on my latest review like a drop of poison. Maybe we should investigate who's really paying for these meals. Within hours, it spread across food blogs and social media, each share adding another crack to my reputation. I stared at my laptop screen in Derek's office, watching the numbers climb. They're coordinating the attacks now. It gets worse. Derek pulled up a series of emails. Someone's been sending your private financial records to restaurant owners, suggesting you've been taking bribes for positive reviews. My phone buzzed, another food editor requesting comment on the allegations. I'd stopped counting after the 10th one. Karen's fingerprints are all over this, I said, but Derek shook his head. These came from Mark's office email. The words hit like a physical blow. I grabbed the desk edge to steady myself. Show me. The evidence was there in black and white. Emails sent late at night, documents I'd never seen, conversations I'd never had. All painting me as a fraud, all from my husband's account. He wouldn't, I whispered. but the certainty in my voice had evaporated. Maybe someone has access to his... The office door opened. Lily burst in, face flushed. "You need to see this." She thrust her phone at me. A video played, Karen at some charity lunch, speaking to a group of socialites. "It breaks my heart," she was saying, "watching someone you love destroy themselves. The drinking, the erratic behavior, that manipulative..." "Wait," Lily fast-forwarded. "This is the part you need to hear." Karen's voice again. "Of course, Mark's been protecting her, covering up the reviews she wrote while intoxicated. Such a loyal son." The phone slipped from my fingers. Derek caught it before it hit the floor. "He knew," I said. "He's been helping them." "We don't know that," Lily insisted. "Mark loves you. He wouldn't..." My own phone lit up, Mark's face on the screen. I let it ring. "You should answer it," Derek said quietly. I did. "Where are you?" "At the office." "Elsie, there's something..." "Your office? Where you've been sending emails about me?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "I can explain," he finally said. "Like your mother explained at lunch about my drinking problem?" "That's not... I didn't..." He paused. "Come home, please. We need to talk about this." "No." The word came out sharp, final. "I think your mother's done enough talking for both of us." I ended the call, turned to Derek. "How quickly can we release what we have?" "Elsie," Lily stepped forward. "Think about what this will do to your marriage." "My marriage?" I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "My marriage died the moment Mark chose his mother over me. Again." Derek was already typing. "I can have it on 3 major food blogs within the hour, but are you sure? This isn't just about Karen anymore. Mark's reputation will match his actions." I pulled up a chair, started typing my own email. "They want to talk about ethics? Let's show them what a real investigation looks like." My phone buzzed again, Karen this time. I declined the call, watched as 3 more followed in quick succession. Then a text from Mark. "Mother's hysterical. What are you doing?" I typed back. "Ask your email archives." "The first post is live," Derek announced. I watched as notifications began flooding in. The story was spreading. Karen's financial manipulation, the restaurant bribes, the coordinated attacks on my reputation. Everything except Mark's involvement. That card I'd hold on to, for now. "Elsie." Lily's voice was soft. "This won't bring him back." "I'm not trying to bring him back." I stood, gathering my things. "I'm trying to make sure they never do this to anyone else." My phone lit up one final time. A text from Tom. "You have no idea what you've started." I smiled, thinking of the evidence still waiting to be released. The years of manipulation, the careful orchestration of my downfall, all meticulously documented thanks to Karen's own arrogance. "No, Tom," I muttered, watching another food blog pick up the story. "But you're about to find out." Derek looked up from his computer. "Where are you going?" "Home," I said, shouldering my bag. "I have a review to write." This time, it wouldn't be about food. It would be about family, betrayal, and the bitter taste of truth. And unlike Karen's carefully crafted lies, every word would be authentic. Let them choke on it. The Metropolitan Review's office buzzed with unusual energy when I arrived. Whispers died as I passed, replaced by the tap of keyboards and rustle of papers. My editor, Janet, waited by my desk, holding a familiar-looking envelope. "Care to explain this?" She handed it over, photographs of me accepting cash outside restaurants, doctored dates matching my most controversial reviews. "Those are fake." Karen Harrison called the board personally. Janet's voice dropped. "She has witnesses, Elsie, restaurant owners willing to testify?" My phone vibrated, another message from Mark. "They're freezing my accounts. What have you done?" "I need time to prove..." "The board's meeting in an hour." Janet's expression softened. "They're suspending you pending investigation." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My phone buzzed again. "Derek, turn on the news now." The break room television showed Karen outside the courthouse, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks. As a mother, watching someone you love spiral into addiction and financial fraud, we only wanted to help her. Tom stood stoically beside her, while Mark, Mark stood on her other side, head bowed in apparent shame. "They're filing a lawsuit," Janet said quietly, "against you and the paper." My laugh sounded strange, even to myself. Of course they are. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop to find my email flooded. Restaurant owners rescinding invitations, publishers canceling contracts, social media notifications piling up like bodies. But one subject line caught my eye. "You're not the first." The sender was anonymous, but the attached documents showed a pattern spanning decades. Other daughters-in-law, other careers destroyed, other lives carefully dismantled by Karen's machinations. My phone rang. Lily. "Are you watching this? It's insane. Mark's actually... I need you to do something for me." I forwarded the anonymous email. "Get this to Derek. Tell him to verify everything." "Elsie, maybe it's time to step back. Let things cool down. They're trying to destroy me, Lily. Everything I've worked for. And you're letting them." Her voice cracked. "I barely recognize you anymore." The words hit harder than Karen's tears or Mark's betrayal. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen, at the shadows under my eyes, the hardness in my expression. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off now, or the next leak won't be about your professional ethics." I started typing a response when my office door opened. Mark stood there looking exhausted. "Don't," I said before he could speak. "You forced this." He stepped inside, closing the door. "Mother was willing to be reasonable, but you..." "Reasonable?" I pulled up the anonymous email. "Like she was with Christine Porter, or Rebecca Chen, or all the other women whose lives she systematically destroyed?" His face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother's previous victims. The pattern's fascinating. Successful women who married into the family, then mysteriously lost everything. Sound familiar?" "You're twisting things." "Am I?" I turned my laptop toward him. "Read it. Every detail, every life she ruined while you all stood by and watched." He started reading, his hands gripping the desk edge. I watched his expression change as reality cracked his carefully maintained denial. My phone buzzed again. "Derek. Documents verified. Ready when you are." "What are you going to do?" Mark's voice was barely audible. I stood, gathering my things. "What I should have done from the beginning. Tell the whole truth." "Elsie, please, they're still my parents." "And I'm still your wife?" I paused at the door. "Or did you forget that while standing next to your mother at the courthouse?" The elevator ride down felt like descending into another world. My phone kept buzzing. Janet, Lily, unknown numbers. I ignored them all, focusing on the message I was composing to Derek. The lobby television showed Karen still outside the courthouse, now announcing a foundation to help troubled food critics overcome their addictions. The performance was flawless, designed to destroy any credibility I had left. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd taught me too well. About protection, about family, about revenge. And now I had proof that this wasn't about protecting Mark or the family name. This was about power, control, and the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened her authority. I sent the message to Derek. "Release everything, all of it." His response came immediately. "No turning back after this." I watched Karen's performance on the screen, her crocodile tears and practiced concern. "Good," I typed back. "It's time everyone saw the real recipe for revenge." The Culinary Excellence Awards gleamed like a trap. Crystal chandeliers cast shadows across familiar faces. Critics, chefs, restaurateurs, all here to witness either my vindication or my complete destruction. I adjusted my black evening gown, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my clutch. Derek's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Security's in position. You're clear to..." "Mrs. Harrison!" A reporter materialized, microphone extended. "Any comment on your mother-in-law's allegations about substance abuse affecting your reviews?" Before I could respond, Karen glided into view, resplendent in crimson. "Oh, darling, you came. We were so worried after your episode at the office." The reporter's eyes lit up. I saw phones turning our way, recording. "Karen." I kept my voice steady. "Quite a performance at the courthouse." Always so dramatic. She touched my arm, perfectly manicured nails digging in slightly. Mark's waiting at our table. He's been absolutely beside himself. I pulled away, scanning the room. Tom stood by the audiovisual booth, deep in conversation with the technician. My presentation files were supposed to play during the award ceremony, exposing everything. My phone buzzed. Lily, don't do this. You're becoming just like her. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The announcer's voice boomed. The ceremony will begin shortly. Karen's smile turned predatory. Shall we? I followed her to the family table, where Mark sat staring into his whiskey. He wouldn't look at me. Before you do whatever you're planning, he said quietly, you should know something. Save it. Mother didn't just target other daughters-in-law. His voice cracked. She's been controlling my career, my investments, everything, for years. My hand froze on the clutch. What? The foundation, she announced? It's being funded with my money. Our money. All of it. Karen returned, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. Darling, remember what the doctor said about getting overexcited. What doctor? I looked between them. The specialist, of course. Karen's voice dripped concern. After Mark's breakdown last week, don't tell me you were too indisposed to notice? The room spun slightly. Last week, when I was focused on gathering evidence, planning this revenge. Derek's voice cut in. Elsie, we have a problem. The presentation files, they're gone. I looked toward the AV booth. Tom was gone too. You know what I admire about you? Karen leaned close, speaking for my ears only. Your dedication, your drive. You remind me so much of myself at your age. I'm nothing like you. No. She gestured around the room. Look what you've accomplished. Destroyed your marriage, alienated your sister, compromised your career, all in pursuit of revenge. Sound familiar? The first award presentation began. My exposé was supposed to start in 15 minutes. It's not revenge, I said. It's justice. That's exactly what I told myself the first time. Karen's mask slipped, showing something ancient and wounded beneath. Ask Mark about his father, his real father. My phone buzzed again. Derek. Found the files. They've been corrupted. Karen had a backup plan. The room felt airless. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes, his hands shaking as he reached for his drink. You see, Karen continued, revenge is a family recipe, and you followed it perfectly. Welcome to the kitchen, darling. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Heads turned. Leaving so soon? Karen's voice carried. But you haven't even presented your evidence. The USB drive felt like it was burning through my clutch. Everything I'd gathered, all the proof of her manipulations, worthless now. Because she was right. I'd become so focused on destroying her, I destroyed myself instead. My phone lit up with messages. Lily, come home, please. Derek. We can find another way. Janet. Board meeting tomorrow. Final decision. But it was the last message that broke me. From an unknown number. I was Karen's first victim. Don't let her make you her last. I looked back at the table. At Mark, broken and controlled. At Tom, complicit and afraid. At Karen, watching me with something like pride. The recipe for revenge was perfect, tested over decades. And I'd followed it exactly, becoming another ingredient in Karen's toxic feast. I turned and walked out of the glittering ballroom, leaving my clutch and all my carefully gathered evidence on the table. Let Karen have her victory tonight. Tomorrow I'd start writing a new recipe, one that didn't taste of ashes and regret. The morning headlines screamed across my phone. Harrison Foundation scandal, decades of manipulation exposed. Karen's carefully constructed world was crumbling, one news alert at a time. I stood outside Le Petit Jardin, where it all began. The restaurant was closed for a private event, Karen's damage control breakfast for her closest allies. But I had one last card to play. Ready? Derek asked, adjusting his waiter's uniform. Stream it live, every second. Inside, Karen held court at my old table, her crimson suit a splash of blood among the pristine white linens. The room fell silent as I approached. "You've lost your mind," Tom started to rise, but Karen's hand shot out, stopping him. "Let her speak." Karen's smile was razor sharp. "I'm sure we're all dying to hear her latest creation." I placed a manila envelope on the table. "Your first victim sent me something interesting about Mark's real father." The color drained from Karen's face. 30 years of perfectly orchestrated destruction," I continued. "Starting with Sarah Mitchell, your husband's secretary, Mark's biological mother." Gasps rippled through the room. Phones emerged, recording. "You're confused, dear." Karen's voice wavered slightly. "The stress has clearly... Sarah didn't disappear after giving birth. You destroyed her just like all the others, but she kept evidence." I tapped the envelope. DNA tests, letters, bank transfers, everything. Tom's hands began to shake. "Karen?" "Tell them," I pressed. "Tell them how you orchestrated each takedown, how you used their own money, their own careers, their own families against them, just like you did with me. I protected this family." Karen's mask cracked. "Everything I did was for Mark." "You destroyed lives for control." Mark's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the kitchen. "Including mine." Karen's eyes widened. "Darling." I found Mother's letters. Mark moved to stand beside me. The real ones, about how she tried to keep me, how you threatened her, how you've been threatening everyone ever since. "I made you strong." Karen stood, her composure shattering. "Everything you are is because of me. Everything I am is broken." Mark's voice was steady, but not anymore. Derek appeared, setting down coffee cups, discreetly adjusting the hidden cameras. The live stream count ticked up, hundreds, thousands watching Karen's empire collapse in real time. "You want to talk about protection?" I stepped closer. "You protected nothing. You consumed everything in your path, including your own son. But you taught me well, Karen, about power, about control, about family. You ungrateful..." She lunged for the envelope, but I was faster. "The difference is, I learned when to stop." I pulled out my phone, showing her the live stream numbers. "This isn't revenge anymore, it's justice." The room erupted as police officers entered, led by Tom. His face was ashen, but resolved. "Karen Harrison," the lead officer began, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and financial manipulation." "Tom?" Karen's voice cracked. "What have you done?" "What I should have done 30 years ago." He couldn't meet her eyes. "When I first discovered what you did to Sarah..." As they led Karen away, her perfectly crafted world dissolving around her, she paused beside me. "You think this is victory?" Her whisper was venom. "Look what you've become. Look what this quest for justice has made you." I watched her go, her words settling like frost. The room buzzed with shocked conversations, phones capturing every moment. Mark stood frozen, 30 years of lies unraveling around him. My phone buzzed. "Lily, you okay?" I looked around the restaurant, at the table where Karen had first shown her true colors, at Mark, who would never be the same, at myself, reflected in the window, changed but not broken. "It's done," I typed back. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the pristine tablecloths. Someone had left a menu open, and my eyes caught the day's special. Justice, served cold. I almost smiled. Karen was right about one thing. I had become something different through all this. Not her reflection as she'd intended, but something entirely my own. Someone who knew the difference between revenge and justice, between destruction and truth. The taste of victory was complex, bitter and sweet, with notes of loss and hope mingled together. Like any good meal, its aftertaste would linger long after the last bite. But at least now, everyone knew who had really been in control of the kitchen all along. The courtroom emptied, leaving just the echo of Karen's sentence hanging in the air. 15 years for fraud, manipulation, and financial crimes. Tom had taken a plea deal, trading testimony for house arrest. The perfect family finally shattered into its true pieces. I lingered, gathering my notes. My latest article sat half-finished on my laptop. The Price of Power, A Family's Fall from Grace. The Metropolitan Review had reinstated me, with a promotion to investigative food journalism. Funny how life serves its own kind of justice. You missed something. Sarah Mitchell's voice startled me. Mark's biological mother stood in the doorway, elegant despite her years of exile. In your investigation, she placed a leather-bound recipe book on the bench between us. Karen's personal collection, its pages yellow with age and use. Each recipe has a name in the margin, Sarah said. Women she destroyed. Their lives reduced to dishes she perfected while taking everything from them. I opened the book. My name was there, next to an unfinished recipe for revenge. She was grooming you, Sarah continued, turning you into her successor, someone who could carry on her legacy of control. The realization hit like bitter wine. Every step I'd taken toward revenge had been ingredients in Karen's final recipe. Even my victory had been part of her design. Why tell me this now? Because you need to decide what to do with it. Sarah touched the book gently. Power isn't just about who wields it. It's about who chooses not to. My phone buzzed. Mark. At Castellanos, need to talk. I found him at our old table, the one where we'd had our first date. 2 glasses of wine waited. I met her, he said as I sat. My real mother. And? She's nothing like either of them, Karen or the woman who raised me. He pushed a folder across the table. Divorce papers, if that's what you want. I left them unopened. What do you want, Mark? To stop being a recipe. His hands shook slightly. To stop being something Karen created, or destroyed, or controlled. To just be. The restaurant hummed around us, life continuing its familiar rhythm. Derek had texted earlier. Karen was already writing her memoirs from prison. Tom was selling their estate, the old order crumbling, making way for something new. I have a review to write, I said, standing. My first, since everything happened. What will you say? I thought of Karen's recipe book, now locked in my desk, of Sarah's words about power and choice, of all the ingredients that had brought us here. The truth, that sometimes the most powerful thing isn't taking control, it's letting go. I left Mark at the table, neither accepting nor rejecting the divorce papers. Some dishes need time to settle, their flavors developing in unexpected ways. At home, I opened my laptop, past the headlines about Karen's empire falling, past the speculation about her victims and victories. My cursor blinked at the start of a new review. We often mistake bitterness for strength, confusing the sharp bite of revenge with the complex depths of justice. But true power lies not in the ability to destroy a perfect meal, but in the courage to create something new from its remains. My phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Karen, somehow reaching out from behind bars. You've learned well. The kitchen is yours now. I deleted it without responding. Karen had taught me many things, but the most important lesson wasn't in her recipe book. It was in what I chose not to become. Lily appeared in my doorway, takeout bags in hand. Chinese or Thai? I figured you could use a break from fancy restaurants. I closed the laptop, leaving the review unfinished. Tomorrow I'd write about food again. Honest reviews of honest meals. But tonight was for simpler tastes, for remembering that not every meal needs to be a masterpiece of manipulation. Both, I said, clearing space on the counter. And Lily, thank you for not letting me completely lose my way. She smiled, unpacking containers. That's what family is for, the real kind. The aroma of garlic and ginger filled my kitchen, replacing the bitter taste of revenge with something warmer, something true. Not a perfect ending, perhaps, but an authentic one. And sometimes, that's the best recipe of all.
I always thought I had a normal life, a bit secluded, maybe, but normal. That's what you think when you grow up, surrounded by the same high walls, the same echoing halls. My name is Valentina Ricci, and I live in a large house near the outskirts of Naples. To anyone peering through our iron gates, it might look like a mansion from a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't tell you about the shadows. My father, Luca Ricci, is a businessman, or so he claims. I've overheard enough hushed phone calls and seen enough strange faces coming in and out of our home to guess that his business isn't the kind you learn about in school. He's a broad-shouldered man with a stern face that rarely smiles, except when he's making a deal or when his pals, who reek of smoke and secrets, pat him on the back and call him Padrino. My mother, Maria, is a beautiful woman, but you can see the sadness etched into her face if you look closely enough. She spends most of her days in the garden or in her painting room, where the smell of oils and turpentine mix with her sighs. One evening I was coming down the stairs, the sound of my footsteps lost in the vastness of our hall, when I heard them, the sharp snaps of my father's voice. I paused, gripping the ornate railing, listening. "You can't back out now, we're too deep in this," he growled in Italian. His words were like ice. "You think you can just walk away? Think about your family." I wasn't supposed to hear that. I wasn't supposed to know these things. I rushed back to my room, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that maybe he was just talking about a regular business deal. But deep down, I knew. Days went by, and the visitors became more frequent. My father would be away for days, coming back at odd hours, his suit smelling of smoke and something else, something metallic, like blood. It was during one of those days when he was away that I found my mother crying in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. "Mama," I said softly, walking over to her. "What's wrong?" She looked up, wiping her eyes. "It's nothing, Valentina. Just adult problems, tesoro." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "Is it about Papa?" She sighed, her gaze drifting to the window where the curtains fluttered slightly with the breeze. "Your father, he has a lot of responsibilities. Things that, well, you wouldn't understand." "But why do you cry?" I pushed, needing to understand her sadness. "It's hard, Valentina," she replied, squeezing my hand. "This life, your father's life, it's not simple. I worry about him, about us. But we could leave, right? If it's so bad, why don't we just go?" Her laugh was bitter, nothing like the warm chuckles she shared on my birthdays. "And go where? Your father's reach is far, and his colleagues, they don't let people just walk away." I wanted to argue, to scream that we could try, but the resignation in her eyes stopped me. It was then I realized that our gilded cage was locked from the outside, and my father held the key. Life took a turn, and the days blended into a silent monotony. My father decided that school wasn't safe for me anymore. "Too many risks," he muttered one evening, not really talking to me, but more to himself. I didn't argue. Arguing with Luca Ricci was like yelling at a storm to stop raining. Useless and potentially dangerous. Instead of school, the dining room became my classroom, and a series of tutors came and went. They taught me languages, English, French, even some German. "For your future," my father said, but he never explained further. Languages I could handle, but the good manners lessons felt like a joke. "Sit up straight, Valentina. A lady never rests her elbows on the table, Valentina. Smile, but not too widely, speak, but not too loudly." One day, I couldn't take another moment of the etiquette tutor's nagging. "Why does it matter?" I snapped, slamming my book shut. "Who am I trying to impress in here?" She looked taken aback, her eyes wide and her mouth pinched tight. "Your father insists." "I don't care what he insists on," I shouted, then immediately regretted my outburst. She was just doing her job, after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller, tighter. I slipped out of my bed and wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The light was on, and my mother was there, sitting at the table again, looking lost in thought. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice a whisper in the large, empty kitchen. She jumped a little, then forced a smile. "Just some things on my mind, Valentina," What about you? I shrugged, pouring myself a glass of water. Just tired of all this. I gestured vaguely around. All these rules and lessons. She sighed and patted the chair next to her. I sat down, feeling suddenly very young and very tired. It's for your own good, they say, she murmured, staring at her own untouched tea. But sometimes, I wonder if we're not just preparing you for another kind of prison. I didn't ask what she meant. It seemed too deep, too dark for the night to hold. The next morning, I was supposed to have another language session, but I lingered over breakfast, dreading the return to the dining table turned classroom. Why do I need to learn all this? I asked the guard who watched over the house, and sometimes over me, as if he might have an answer. He just shrugged, his face unreadable. Orders from your father, that's all I know. And there it was again, the weight of silence, pressing down on me, suffocating and impenetrable. As I walked back to the table, the guard's steps echoed behind me, a reminder that even my complaints were monitored, evaluated, and contained within these walls. Days passed, and I grew more resentful, more suffocated by the silence and the secrets. I knew the tutors whispered about me, about my family. I saw the way they looked at me, like I was a bomb that might go off at any mention of the outside world. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next, with the same dreary sameness. I was turning 18 soon, and I could feel the walls of my home closing in on me. Something had to change, or I would suffocate in this golden prison. On the morning of my birthday, my father called me into his study, a room filled with dark wood and darker secrets. Valentina, he began, his voice firm, you are now of age. It's time we discussed your future more seriously. I tensed, knowing that whatever he had planned wasn't going to be something I'd like. What about my future? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his gaze calculating. You will marry Giancarlo Rossi. He's a good man, comes from a strong family. This will be good for us, for our families. I felt my stomach drop. Marry? But I don't even know him. The thought of marrying a stranger, especially one chosen by my father, made me want to run screaming from the room. It's not a request, Valentina, he said, his voice hardening. It's decided. You will meet him next week. Be ready. After I left his study, my mind raced with panic and fear. Marry Giancarlo? I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had to get out of here. Over the next few days, I hatched a plan. It was risky, but it was the only shot I had. I approached my father under the guise of acceptance. Father, I said, trying to sound as meek as I could, since I am to be married soon, could I perhaps travel to the USA? A kind of pre-wedding trip? He regarded me suspiciously. Why the USA? I want to see the world a little before I settle down, I lied smoothly. Just a few weeks. I'll be careful. I promise. He pondered for a moment, then nodded. Fine. But Marco will go with you. No arguments. Marco was one of his most trusted guards. The man was a mountain, silent and immovable. The challenge just got bigger, but I had no choice. Thank you, Father, I said, keeping my relief hidden. The following week, as planned, I landed in New York City with Marco shadowing my every move. The city was a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the stifling life back home. I knew I had to act fast. One day, while Marco was distracted, I slipped into a store and bought a few essentials, clothes, a wig, and a prepaid phone. Later, at a crowded supermarket, I seized my moment. I feigned interest in some products on a lower shelf, waited for Marco to move ahead, then quickly changed my appearance in the restroom. Heart pounding, I walked right out of the supermarket, another face in the crowd. I didn't stop walking until my legs burned and my breath came in sharp gasps. The first few weeks in New York were a blur. Every day was a battle between the thrill of freedom and the gnawing fear of being caught. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Marco or someone else from my father's world. But the city was big, noisy, and indifferent, a perfect place to hide. Renting a tiny apartment in a less fashionable part of town was my first step towards a normal life. The building was old and the elevator barely worked, but it was mine. My landlord, a grumpy old man named Mr. Klein, didn't ask many questions. "Just pay your rent on time," he grunted when handing over the keys. Finding a job was harder. My tourist visa was about to expire, and I knew I couldn't work legally. After many days of searching, I found a small cafe willing to pay cash under the table. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. The cafe was run by a tough, no-nonsense woman named Gina. On my first day, she eyed me skeptically. "You ever worked a coffee machine before, honey?" I shook my head. "No, but I'm a quick learner." "You better be. I can't afford to babysit," she said, but her tone softened slightly. "All right, I'll show you, but keep up." Working at the cafe was exhausting, but fulfilling. I learned to make coffee the way New Yorkers liked it, strong and fast. The regulars were a mixed bunch, and slowly, I started feeling less like an outsider. One evening, as I was closing up, a customer I recognized as a regular, Mike, lingered at the counter. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his tone friendly but curious. "No, I'm not," I admitted, wiping down the counter. "You got a story, huh?" he pressed, in a way that wasn't prying but seemed genuinely interested. "Doesn't everyone?" I replied, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mike laughed, a deep, hearty sound. "True enough. Well, if you ever need help or a friend, I'm around. Us New Yorkers gotta stick together." His kindness was unexpected and warmed a corner of my heart. "Thanks, Mike. I might take you up on that." As days turned into weeks, I grew more comfortable in my new skin. But with my visa expired, I was officially an illegal immigrant. The fear of deportation loomed large, a constant shadow over my newfound independence. As time passed, Mike became more than just a friendly face at the cafe. We started seeing each other outside of my shifts, and I found comfort in his easygoing nature and his willingness to listen. One night, over a quiet dinner, I finally spilled my whole story to him, the fear, the flight, everything. Mike listened, his face a mask of concern. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he reached across the table, took my hand, and squeezed it. "Let's get you sorted," he said. "Marry me. I'll help you stay." It wasn't a declaration of undying love, but it was genuine and it was real, more real than anything I'd hoped for. We got married quietly and moved into his apartment. With my new legal status, I managed to land a job as a saleswoman in an upscale clothing store. My language skills and good manners made me a perfect fit, and for the first time, I felt like I was building something for myself. I was still cautious, still looking over my shoulder, but now I had someone by my side. Someone who knew all of me and stayed. Mike and I settled into a semblance of domesticity, and for a moment, I dared to feel safe, even content. I started social media pages to share snippets of my new, seemingly idyllic life. But that veneer of happiness was thin, easily shattered. One evening, scrolling through social media, my newfound peace crumbled. On Mike's page, there was a photo that caught my eye, a picture of him with another woman, her arms wrapped around him, both smiling broadly at some glittery event. Confusion and a sharp sting of betrayal cut through me. I waited, tense and cold, for him to come home. When he walked through the door, I confronted him immediately, holding up my phone to show him the picture. "Who is she?" My voice was sharp, a knife edge of hurt underlying the question. He looked at the photo and then back at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation. "That's Lisa," he admitted. "I've been seeing her." The simplicity of his confession, the blunt honesty of it, knocked the wind out of me. "Seeing her? While you're married to me?" I struggled to keep my voice even. "Valentina, I thought you understood," he started, his tone frustratingly calm. "Our marriage, it was more of a convenience, a help. It wasn't meant to be real." "Real?" The word echoed mockingly around the sparse living room. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up, Not real? You think because you married me to help me out that it gives you the right to, what? Cheat openly? Where does that leave me, Mike? He shrugged, a gesture that ignited my anger further. I told you, I don't see this as a real marriage. I thought we had an understanding. An understanding? No, Mike, you never said you'd humiliate me like this. The hurt was rapidly being replaced by a searing anger. He looked at me hard then. Valentina, you can always go back to your father if something doesn't suit you. As the days turned into weeks, Mike's behavior worsened. He began to drink more, his temper shortening with each glass. He started ordering me around, his words sharp and commanding. If I protested, he'd remind me of my precarious situation, of the ease with which he could send me back to my father. You should be grateful, he'd sneer. I'm your ticket to staying here, remember? His nights out became more frequent, and I was left alone, wrestling with my thoughts, the loneliness eating at me. Then, one evening, he went too far. Coming home drunk, he threw a demand over his shoulder as he stumbled past me. Go sleep on the balcony tonight, I don't want to hear you moving around and bothering me. Then, one morning, as if my life needed more complication, I received a message from my father on social media. The message was cold, threatening. I know where you are. You will come home, or you will suffer the consequences. You have shamed us, running away like a coward. You will be locked away if you force my hand. I showed the message to Mike, hoping, perhaps foolishly, for some semblance of support or protection. Instead, his eyes lit up with a grotesque kind of glee. This is perfect, he said, grinning. We can use this. The idea was out of some wild crime drama, but Mike was buzzing with excitement about it. We're gonna stage your kidnapping. It's foolproof. We demand a ransom from your old man, he pays, and we're set, he explained with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. This is insane, I protested, the weight of the plan sinking in. We can't just pretend I'm kidnapped. What about the consequences? Mike waved off my concerns with a flick of his hand. Consequences? Val, look, your father won't ever find out it was us. We'll be long gone with the cash before anything can backfire. I tried again, my voice firm. I don't want to do this, Mike. It's wrong, and it's dangerous. But Mike wasn't listening. His mind was made up. It's too late for cold feet, he snapped. He grabbed my phone and locked himself in the bedroom, leaving me pacing the living room, feeling trapped and helpless. Hours later, he emerged with a smug look. Done, he said, showing me the message he'd sent to my father. It claimed that I had been kidnapped, and the ransom was $1 million. He even managed to take a convincing photo of me, looking distressed and weary, which he attached to the message. Mike was practically bouncing on his heels as he replied, Now we wait. Once he pays, we can finally get the hell out of here. The waiting was the hardest part. I felt like I was in a bad dream, watching the hours tick by, each minute stretching out endlessly. Mike was glued to his computer, checking the offshore account repeatedly, while I tried to stay out of his way, my anxiety mounting. Then, just a day later, Mike whooped with joy. He paid. The money's here. His delight was grotesque, as he logged into the account and showed me the balance. $1 million. It was real. This was actually happening. I'm heading to the bank first thing to get this sorted into cash. We'll need to move fast after that, he said, already grabbing his coat and keys. As the door slammed behind him, I realized that Mike, in his own way, was no different from my father. Here I was, caught between the criminal machinations of my father and the deceitful schemes of my husband. I had escaped one cage only to find myself locked in another. I was throwing my clothes into a bag when I heard Mike's car pull up outside. My heart hammered in my chest as I scrambled to destroy anything that might lead him, or worse, my father, to me. Shredding papers, deleting emails, I was a whirlwind of desperate activity. Just as I zipped up my bag, the door flew open. Mike stumbled in, his eyes glazed over from drink, a wild grin plastered on his face. He dangled his car keys in front of him. "Hey, Val, go fetch us some dinner from that Chinese place, will ya? I'm starved." His slurred words barely registered as I took the keys, my mind racing. This was my chance. Without a word, I bolted for the door, heart pounding as I slipped into the driver's seat of his car. I didn't head for the restaurant. Instead, I drove. The highway stretched out before me like a ribbon of freedom, and I pushed the car faster, watching the city lights blur past. My pulse matched the frantic beat of the tires on the road. I had no destination in mind, just a way, anywhere but here. My phone buzzed incessantly in the passenger seat, a relentless reminder of the world I was fleeing. At a red light, I grabbed it, turned it off, and tossed it into a trash can on a deserted street corner. If my father had ways of tracking me, I wouldn't make it easy for him. Hours passed as I drove, the night deepening around me. By the time I pulled into a motel in a small town I didn't know, my nerves were frayed, and exhaustion was setting in. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and collapsed on the bed. Sleep was fitful, filled with nightmares of chases and captures. When morning broke, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together my next move. I turned on the TV for background noise more than anything else, but froze when a news report caught my attention. Mysterious attack last night in New York City. The victim, identified as Michael Davidson, was found dead in his home, which appeared to have been ransacked by unknown assailants. The breath whooshed out of me. Mike was dead. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Whatever his faults, whatever the mess he'd dragged me into, I hadn't wished him dead. The report speculated that the attackers were searching for something, possibly related to criminal activities. I packed up in a rush, my hands shaking. I needed to get away before anyone connected me to Mike's death. As I loaded the last of my bags into the trunk of the car, a heavy weight settled at the bottom, caught my eye. It was a gym bag I hadn't noticed before. Curious and wary, I unzipped it. Inside, stacks of cash stared back at me, hundreds, thousands, $1 million in crisp bills. The ransom money. Mike must have stashed it here before coming inside last night. For a long moment, I just stared. This money was the cause of all this chaos, the reason Mike was dead, the reason my life was in ruins. But it also represented a chance to start over, to live free from my father's shadow, to compensate for years of fear and manipulation. The nagging fear of my past catching up never completely left me. I made a tough decision, one that went against my morals, but felt necessary for my safety. I underwent plastic surgery and purchased documents in a new name. It was against the law, and the guilt weighed on me, but the fear of my old life, discovering me, was stronger. I reassured myself it was a necessary evil to protect my newfound peace. Finally, I found myself drawn to a small coastal town. I rented a small apartment with a view of the ocean, the soothing sound of the waves a constant reminder of the freedom I now possessed. The first few weeks were tough. I took long walks on the beach, the salty air clearing my mind, helping me to plan. I needed a job, a way to sustain myself without dipping into the gym bag full of cash too often. One morning, while sipping coffee at a local diner, I overheard a conversation from the next table. "We're swamped at the gallery since Jenna left. Can't seem to find anyone who knows their way around handling artwork." Without thinking, I turned and said, "I have experience with that." It wasn't entirely true, but I had helped organize charity art auctions back in the city. The woman looked me over, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Is that so? You looking for work?" "Yeah, I am," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Come by tomorrow. Let's see what you've got," she said, handing me a business card. Her brisk, no-nonsense tone reminded me of Gina, but gentler. That conversation turned into a job offer, and suddenly, I found myself working at a local art gallery. It was a small place, but it buzzed with creativity and passion. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. The fear that had clung to me, shadow-like, began to dissipate. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, no longer jumping at shadows. I started to make friends, real friends who knew nothing of my past, only the person I was now. My name's Elizabeth. I teach science at a private school, and thanks to my folks having a bit of money, I've had a cushy life so far. But let's not get into that, it's not like I flaunt it. Every morning, before the sun gets too bold, I lace up my sneakers and hit the park trails for a run. There's this elderly lady, Mrs. Ramsey, who parks herself on the same bench every morning. She just sits there watching the lot of us run laps, like we're on some reality show. One crisp morning, as I slowed down for a breather near her usual spot, she called out to me. "Good morning. You're quite the regular, aren't you?" she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone her age. "Yeah, I try to be," I replied, wiping the sweat off my brow. "Helps me keep sane." She chuckled. "I bet it does. I'm Marjorie, by the way. Marjorie Ramsey." "Elizabeth," I said, stretching my legs a bit. "Nice to meet you, Marjorie." Marjorie patted the spot next to her. "Mind if I give you some company while you catch your breath?" I sat down, figuring a little chat wouldn't hurt. "Not at all. Do you come here just to watch us run?" "Partly," she admitted with a mischievous grin. "But I also like the fresh air, and I've been looking for someone." "Looking for someone? In the park?" I frowned, a bit puzzled. "Not like that, dear," she laughed. "I've been on the lookout for a suitable young woman." I raised an eyebrow. "Suitable for what exactly?" "For my son," she said bluntly. "He needs a good wife." I almost choked on my water. "Come again?" "You heard me," Marjorie said, her eyes scanning my face. "My son, he's a good man. Successful, kind, but terribly shy. I figured it's time he settled down." "And you're scouting in the park?" I couldn't help but laugh. It was bizarre, really. "If you see what I see, dear, you'd understand. Healthy, smart women in their prime. Like you," she explained, her gaze firm yet kind. I shook my head, still amused by the absurdity of it all. "So, what does this son of yours even think about his mom picking out girls for him?" Marjorie shrugged. "Michael trusts my judgment. He knows I just want him to be happy." I stood up, ready to continue my run. "Well, good luck with that, Marjorie. It was nice meeting you." As I jogged away, her words lingered in my mind. It was definitely one of the weirder conversations I'd had. Little did I know, that wouldn't be the last I'd hear from Marjorie Ramsey or her mysterious son. Curiosity got the best of me. After that strange chat with Marjorie about her son needing a wife, I couldn't shake off the peculiarity of it all. A month passed since our park bench recruitment session, and I received a casual invitation for dinner at her place. "Just a friendly dinner, with a bit of family," her message said. Why I agreed, I'll never know. Maybe I was just looking for a story to laugh about later with my friends. I dressed simple, but nice, figuring I'd blend in better if I didn't look like I was trying too hard. I drove over to the address she gave me, an old-fashioned house with a welcoming glow in the windows. Marjorie greeted me at the door with a warmth that felt genuine. "Elizabeth, I'm so glad you could make it. Come in, come in." The house was cozy, filled with the scent of something delicious. She led me into the dining room where a few people gathered around a large table. "Everyone, this is Elizabeth, the lovely young woman I met at the park." A man, who must have been her husband, stood up first, a big grin on his face. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm Harold, Marjorie's other half." Next to him, a younger man, clearly the son, extended his hand. "Hi, I'm Michael. Mom has told me quite a bit about you." His handshake was firm, his smile shy but kind. I couldn't help but notice he wasn't what I expected. He seemed normal, nice even. And then a woman, around my age, with a friendly face, came over with her arm extended. "I'm Anna, Michael's sister. And don't worry, we're not all in on this matchmaking scheme." Her tone was teasing, and I relaxed a bit, laughing with her. "Glad to hear it," I replied. We settled around the table, and the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Michael was a software developer, not the entrepreneur Marjorie had embellished him to be, and Anna worked as a graphic designer. As we ate, Marjorie couldn't help herself. Elizabeth teaches science at a private school, you know. Quite the brainy one. Mom, let's not start selling her credentials. Michael chuckled, his cheeks reddening a bit. The food was great, and the company was unexpectedly enjoyable. Michael was easy to talk to, his interests broad and his humor gentle. Anna was a riot, her sharp wit making me laugh more than I had in weeks. Michael helped clear the table, and I found myself helping, the two of us falling into an easy rhythm. Sorry about all this, he murmured as we stacked dishes in the kitchen. Mom means well, but she can be a bit much. It's fine, really. I've enjoyed getting to know everyone, I said honestly. As I drove home later that night, I reflected on the evening. It had been nothing like I expected. No pressure, just good food and good people. Maybe Marjorie was a bit unconventional in her methods, but her family was alright. The next day, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Michael. Hey, Elizabeth, he started, sounding a bit nervous. Would you like to meet up, just the two of us this time? Maybe at a cafe downtown? I was taken aback, but pleased. Yeah, that sounds great. We met up the next day, and without the family around, it was even easier to talk. We laughed a lot, shared stories, and before we knew it, a couple of hours had flown by. As we left the cafe, Michael said, I had a really good time today. Would you like to do this again? Definitely, I agreed, already looking forward to it. Driving home, I couldn't help but feel excited about what was next. Maybe Marjorie was onto something after all, even if her methods were a bit unconventional. After that coffee date with Michael, things just took off like a shot. We started seeing each other almost every other day. It wasn't anything fancy at first, just casual meetups after work, grabbing a bite or catching a movie. But it was clear, at least to me, that there was something there. Something that felt like it could turn into a lot more. One chilly evening, Michael picked me up from school. We drove out to the coast, which was his surprise plan to watch the sunset. It was pretty cold, but he brought along a thick blanket. We sat on the hood of his car, wrapped in the blanket, watching the sky change colors. It was quiet except for the sound of the waves and the occasional laugh from us. Suddenly, he turned to me, his face serious for once. Elizabeth, I've been thinking, he started, hesitating a bit. These past weeks with you have been, well, amazing. I'm not good with words, but I really like you. A lot. I smiled, feeling the warmth not just from the blanket but from what he was saying. I like you too, Michael. A lot. I mimicked his tone, and we both laughed. From then on, things just seemed to fall into place. We met each other's friends, and even though my pals were a bit skeptical at first, given how we met, they soon saw what I saw in him. Michael was straightforward, no airs about him. He liked simple things, a good burger, classic movies, and long walks. 6 months flew by, and every day felt a bit brighter than the last. I knew I was falling in love with him, not just because he was kind and funny, but because he made everything seem straightforward, no complications, just us. One evening, while we were having dinner at my place, Michael got unusually quiet. After a while, he took a deep breath, reached across the table, and held my hand. Elizabeth, these months with you, they've been the happiest of my life, he said, his voice steady but intense. I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? It wasn't a fancy proposal. No kneeling, no ring in the champagne. But it was real, it was sincere, and it was us. I didn't need a second to think it over. Yes, Michael. Absolutely, yes, I answered, my heart racing with joy. We got married quietly, just a small ceremony with family and a few friends. It was perfect, just like everything with him seemed to be. We moved into my apartment, merging our lives and belongings, which surprisingly took little effort. Settling into married life with Michael was like slipping into a comfortable rhythm we both seemed to naturally follow. Mornings were filled with quick coffees and kisses goodbye, evenings were for cooking together or sometimes just ordering in when we felt lazy. Life was good, simple, and happy. But just when I thought things couldn't get any better, I found out I was pregnant. The day I found out, I was a bundle of nerves. I waited for Michael to come home, the positive test clutched in my hand. When he walked through the door, looking tired from the day but smiling as soon as he saw me, I blurted it out. "Michael, we're going to have a baby." His face froze for a second, and then a cautious smile crept up. "Really? Wow, that's amazing, Liz." He hugged me, but there was a hesitancy in his voice that I hadn't expected. I brushed it off as shock. After all, it was big news. We told his parents the following weekend over dinner at their place. I thought they'd be over the moon, considering they'd dropped hints about grandkids since the day we got married. Marjorie's reaction was all smiles. "That's wonderful news, dear. Isn't that wonderful, Harold?" Harold just nodded, his usual chatty self somewhat subdued. "Yes, very good news." The enthusiasm seemed forced, and I caught Michael watching his father closely, a frown forming when he thought no one was looking. After we announced the pregnancy at a family dinner, everyone reacted more or less positively, except for Anna, who seemed visibly upset. I found a moment to talk to her after dinner. "Hey, Anna, you okay? You seemed a bit down earlier." She sighed, looking away before meeting my eyes. "It's just that. I can't have kids, Liz. Found out a while back. Even led to my divorce. It's tough seeing everyone else move on, you know?" Her confession hit me hard. Here I was, wrapped up in my own drama, not seeing her pain. I reached out, squeezing her hand. "I'm so sorry, Anna. I had no idea." She managed a small smile. "It's not your fault. I'm happy for you, really. Just takes me a bit to adjust sometimes." As my belly grew, so did the awkwardness around Michael's family. They were polite but distant, which was a stark contrast to their initial excitement about the potential for grandchildren. Michael himself was supportive but increasingly distant. His once warm cuddles now felt like he was holding back. Things got weirder with his parents too. The usual Sunday dinners became less frequent, and when we did go, Marjorie and Harold hardly asked about the pregnancy. They talked about everything else, Anna's new job, Harold's golf games, even the neighbor's landscaping, anything but the upcoming grandchild. During one particularly tense visit, I overheard Marjorie whispering to Michael in the kitchen. "Make sure everything's ready for the baby." Michael's reply was low, but I caught the tail end of it. "I know, Mom. I'm on top of it." What was there to be on top of? His vague, cryptic responses and the lack of enthusiasm were starting to wear me down. Giving birth to my son was the most surreal experience of my life. There he was, this perfect little human that Michael and I created, and he was all ours. But the bliss of becoming a mother got a rude awakening the very next day. It was early morning, not long after the nurses had shifted shifts, when one of them came into my room. She looked around quickly, a bit too nervously for a regular checkup. "I need to take him for some special procedures," she muttered, reaching for my son's crib. "Special procedures?" I echoed, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "What kind of procedures?" No one mentioned anything about taking him away. She paused, her hands hovering over my baby. "It's just routine, ma'am. We need to run a few tests." I reached out, my instinct screaming at me to keep my baby close. "I'd like to see some kind of order for that." "Can you bring me the paperwork?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. The nurse blinked, taken aback. I'll be right back," she stammered, and hurried out, without my son. Something about that interaction didn't sit right with me. I pressed the call button for another nurse, wanting more answers, but before anyone came, the shift changed, and the atmosphere seemed to calm down. That night, however, the same nurse returned. It was late, the dim lights in my hospital room casting long shadows. She didn't see that I was still awake, my eyes barely closed. In her arms was another baby, not mine, and she was tiptoeing towards my son's crib. Adrenaline shot through me. Ignoring the pain in my body, I got up and confronted her. "What are you doing? Who's that child?" The nurse jumped, nearly dropping the infant she held. I got the rooms mixed up," she stammered, her face pale. "Rooms mixed up? Really? Twice in one day with the same baby?" I snapped, my heart racing. The baby in her arms began to cry, and the nurse quickly turned and left, almost running from my room. I was left shaking, clutching my son to my chest, too scared to let him go even for a second. Come morning, the whole incident felt like a nightmare. I called my mom, recounting the events, my voice trembling. "Sweetheart, it's probably just your hormones going wild. You just had a baby, it's normal to feel overprotective," she soothed. Was I being paranoid? No, something was wrong, but my exhausted mind struggled to piece it together. Later that day, I was discharged and went home. Michael was there, waiting for us. His reaction, however, was not what I expected. He looked at our son, his expression unreadable and distant. "Isn't he perfect?" I tried to break the ice, handing our son to him. "Yeah, sure," Michael responded flatly, his interaction lacking any warmth. I watched, a sinking feeling in my gut, as he handed our son back to me much too quickly. "I've got to catch up on some work," he muttered and disappeared into his home office. It's been a year since I brought my son into this world, a year that should have been filled with shared smiles and family warmth. Instead, it's been the most confusing and cold period of my life. Michael, who once promised to stand by me through everything, now spends most of his time at work. When he is home, it's like he's just a shadow passing through our lives, barely noticing his own son. The change wasn't sudden. It crept up on us, gradually, like a slow-moving storm cloud. I noticed it first when, despite all the excitement of his parents about having a grandson, they lost interest almost immediately after he was born. Their enthusiasm shifted in ways I couldn't understand. One afternoon, Anna, Michael's sister, dropped by with a toddler. She was glowing with a new kind of joy. "I adopted him," she told me, her eyes lighting up. "Mom suggested I look into adoption, and well, here he is." She introduced me to a bright-eyed little boy, who clung to her with shy curiosity. I was happy for her, truly, but I couldn't help but notice the lavish attention her son received from my in-laws. Toys, clothes, endless visits, Anna's son received everything. And my son? It was as if he didn't exist in their world. Michael didn't seem bothered by his parents' blatant favoritism. He spent whatever little time he had at home talking to Anna about her son, completely ignoring our child who yearned for just a fraction of that attention. I tried talking to Michael about it. One evening, after another dinner where Michael had excused himself early to work, I confronted him. "Michael, we need to talk. It's about our son," I started, my voice steady despite the churn of emotions inside me. "You've missed his first words, his first steps. You don't see him, Michael. And neither do your parents. What's going on?" Michael sighed, finally shutting his laptop with a snap. "Liz, you're making it into a bigger deal than it is. We're busy, that's all." "Too busy for your own son?" My voice cracked, the hurt too deep to mask. "Why do your parents shower Anna's son with affection and ignore ours?" "It's just different, Liz. Anna's situation is different." He was evasive, his words doing nothing to soothe the growing rift between us. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Anna's child received all the love and attention from his grandparents that my son should have been getting. It wasn't just the gifts. It was the visits, the cuddles, the photos taken and shared with pride. Meanwhile, my son's milestones went unnoticed, his achievements uncelebrated. I was fed up, truly exhausted from the constant coldness and secrets. It came to a head during a family dinner, which was as tense as ever. I was determined to have it out with Michael, to demand answers about why everything had turned so sour. Just as I was about to speak, Michael, to my shock, beat me to it. "I need to talk to you," he said flatly, his eyes avoiding mine. "Fine," I replied. "I have things to say too." Michael's next words hit me like a freight train. "I don't love you anymore, Liz. I don't need you." His voice was cold, emotionless. My heart skipped. "What about your son? Our son?" He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "I'm convinced you've been cheating. That kid isn't mine." His mother, sitting beside him, nodded her approval at his words. It was like a coordinated strike. Michael slid an envelope across the table. "Here are the divorce papers. I'm filing for a paternity test. When it shows that kid isn't mine, I'll be asking for compensation for your betrayal." I was speechless, my mind racing. Accusations of infidelity? Demands for compensation? This wasn't just cold, it was brutal. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I've never been unfaithful, and I'll take your test. You'll see you're wrong." My voice was shaking, but I was furious. As I left, his mother hurled insults at me, words so vile they made me tremble with anger. I left their house, the echo of her slurs following me out the door. Back at my place, I called my mom, who was livid when she heard what happened. "Remember that nurse incident at the hospital? Maybe it's time to dig deeper," she suggested. Taking her advice, I hired a private investigator and ordered a comprehensive DNA test, not just for Michael, but for his parents too. I needed to uncover everything, whatever the cost. A month later, armed with the results, I returned to face them. Michael, his sister, and her adopted son were all there, playing on the floor as if this was just another family gathering. His parents lounged on the couch, an air of smug satisfaction about them. Michael looked up with a sneer. "Well, what did the test show?" I opened the envelope, my hand steady, despite the pounding in my chest. "The test shows a 99% probability of paternity. Michael, you are the father of our son." I let the words hang in the air, watching his face fall. "And there's more," I continued, turning to his parents. "Michael's mother is biologically related to our son. But Michael's father is not his biological grandfather." The room went silent. The color drained from his mother's face, she looked from me to her husband, who was now standing, his expression one of betrayal and fury. "You," he shouted at her. "I knew it. You've been lying for years." She started crying, her hands covering her face as she confessed to years of deceit. "This is just the surface of it," I announced, my voice ringing clear and loud. "There's an entire scheme orchestrated by none other than my mother-in-law, with the knowing participation of Michael. Marjorie devised a plan to avoid the expenses of surrogacy by ensuring her son married a suitable candidate, me. A wealthy, healthy woman, selected specifically to bear a child for the purpose of inheriting the family's fortune." I continued, the words tasting bitter. "After my son was born, the next phase of their plan was to replace him with another child, a baby switched by a bribed nurse whom a private detective has since convinced to testify against you." Anna's eyes widened, her gaze flickering between her brother and her mother, betrayal written all over her face. And the cruelty didn't end there. This woman, I pointed directly at my mother-in-law, persuaded Anna to adopt a child she believed was mine, thinking she was raising her biological grandson. Anna's face crumpled, tears streaming down as she clutched the little boy closer to her chest. Her mother, my mother-in-law, had been sobbing moments before, her secrets exposed, her marriage crumbling. But at my accusation, she hardened, her tears drying as she turned to Anna. "He's not ours, Anna. It's best if he goes back." But Anna shook her head, her voice breaking, but resolute. "No, mother. He's my son. I love him, and I won't let him go, because of your mistakes. Because of your actions, Michael, and you will face the consequences," I declared, my resolve as firm as the gavel I imagined in my hand. "I am suing for full custody of my son and for damages for the fraud attempted." You tried to steal my son and accuse me of infidelity, to strip me of everything. The court proceedings that followed were grueling but straightforward. Armed with irrefutable evidence and the testimony of the nurse, the judgment was swift. My mother-in-law received a sentence of 2 years for her role in the deception. Michael agreed to a settlement that included substantial financial support and alimony. As the judge pronounced the sentence, my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law, a man betrayed and broken, filed for divorce, severing the last ties that bound him to the woman he had once loved. Now, I focus on raising him in a world filled with love and devoid of deceit. Anna and her son are frequent visitors to our home, the children playing together as we support each other in our new lives. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jenna, an assistant manager at a bustling marketing firm. For years, my life revolved solely around deadlines and presentations, until Mark came along. We met at a corporate event. He was the keynote speaker, talking about innovative architectural designs. He was confident, something that drew me in immediately, but what really caught me was his unassuming smile when he talked about his projects. A year after that meeting, I was not just attending another conference, but also planning a wedding. Mark proposed unexpectedly during a quiet dinner at home, a stark contrast to the public persona I first met. We married in a small ceremony, and I moved into the house he shared with his mother, Susan. Susan was a small woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She greeted me on moving day, sizing me up with a critical eye as I lugged my boxes inside. "Make sure those boxes don't scuff the floors," she instructed, her voice stern. "Of course, Susan. I'll be careful," I responded, trying to keep my tone light. I learned quickly that Susan had rules for everything, from where to place my shoes to how the dishwasher should be loaded. It was her house, after all, and I was keen on making a good impression. Living with one's mother-in-law could be challenging, but I was determined to make it work. But it wasn't just the rules. There were the Sunday dinners when Susan would recount tales of raising Mark by herself, a monumental effort after her husband left following their daughter's death. She would look away sometimes, her voice dropping a notch. It was tough, raising a boy alone. But we managed, didn't we, Mark? Mark would nod, pass the potatoes, and quickly change the subject. I got the sense that these stories were Susan's way of reminding me of her sacrifices. One particularly chilly evening, as Mark was late from work again, Susan and I found ourselves alone. She was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her famous beef stew, when I decided to join her, trying to break the ice. "Can I help with anything?" I offered. She glanced over her shoulder, then pointed at the salad. "Dress that. And don't drown it in vinegar like last time." Her words stung a bit, but I kept my smile. "I'll get it right this time." As I mixed the salad, Susan continued her monologue about the past. "Mark was always such a sensitive child. Needed more looking after than most boys. It's good you're here now. Maybe you'll manage better than I did," she said, her words a mix of hope and challenge. Settling into life with Susan and Mark proved to be a complex dance of personal boundaries and shared spaces. The early days were tough, with Susan watching every move I made around the house. But as time wore on, I started finding my rhythm, and oddly enough, it was the moments when Mark was away that brought Susan and I closer. One lazy Saturday afternoon, while Mark was out on one of his frequent business trips, Susan invited me to join her for coffee. The living room was cozy, a stark contrast to the cold formalness Susan usually exuded. "Sit down, Jenna. Coffee's almost ready," she called from the kitchen. "Thanks, Susan," I replied, taking a seat on the plush sofa, trying to make myself comfortable amid the embroidered cushions. Susan sat opposite me, her eyes studying me over the rim of her cup. "Mark tells me you're handling the new project at work," she said, her tone more curious than intrusive. "Yeah, it's a big one. Lots of late nights ahead," I responded, appreciating that she was making an effort to talk about something other than household chores. Susan nodded, then her expression shifted as she seemed to decide on something. "Jenna, I know we've had our, let's say, adjustments. But I want you to know, I'm glad he chose you." Her words took me by surprise. "Thank you, Susan. That means a lot." We sipped our coffee in a more comfortable silence than before, the air between us lighter. "Did Mark ever tell you about his sister?" Susan suddenly asked, setting her mug down. "No, not really," I admitted, curious about the family history Mark rarely mentioned. Susan leaned back, her gaze distant. "It was a hard time, losing her. Changed everything for us." "I can only imagine," I said softly, sensing the pain behind her words. Susan shook her head slightly. "You never get over something like that. But you learn to live, I suppose. That's why I've been hard on you. I needed to know if you could handle this family, with all its scars." Her honesty was unexpected but welcome. "I'm here to stay, Susan. I want to make this work, for all of us." She nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face. "I'm counting on it." "Mark's father, he never got over it," Susan continued, looking into her coffee as though it held the past. "He blamed me for our little girl's death. Said I should have been more careful, should have done something differently. But there was nothing I could have done, nothing to foresee. It tore us apart, and he left not long after." From then on, our relationship took on a new dimension. It wasn't perfect overnight, but there was a mutual respect forming. Evenings often found us in the kitchen together, where Susan would reluctantly pass me the salad bowl without a critical remark, where I would handle the delicate china with care without being reminded. Life at Susan's place settled into a routine, one that was comfortable in its predictability. I still put long hours at work, but now there was more to come home to. One particular evening, I discovered something that would change our lives forever. I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was going to be a mom. Excited and nervous, I bought a couple of those test kits, just to be sure. Each one confirmed what I already knew: our family was about to get bigger. I planned how to break the news to Mark, imagining a perfect, joyous moment. That night, when he came home from work, I had dinner ready, his favorite, spaghetti and meatballs. The table was set, the candles lit. I could barely contain my excitement. "Hey, babe, something smells good," Mark said, loosening his tie as he walked in. "Sit down, I've got news," I said, my voice trembling a bit with nerves. Mark raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. "Good news, I hope?" I nodded, handing him a small box I'd wrapped. Inside was the positive pregnancy test. "We're going to have a baby," I blurted out before he could open it. Mark's smile faltered. He paused, looking at the test, then back at me. "Wow, are we ready for this?" His reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. "I think we are. I mean, I know we hadn't planned this now, but I'm happy, Mark, aren't you?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that I'm not happy, Jen. It's just, babies are a big deal, and they need a lot, and we can do this," I cut in, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll still work, we'll manage. We always do." Mark nodded slowly, still not quite meeting my eyes. Yeah, of course. We'll manage. It's just a lot to take in, you know?" Dinner went on, the candles burning lower, the initial excitement I felt dampening under the weight of Mark's hesitant acceptance. It was clear we had a lot to talk about, a lot to figure out. The next day, after a night of little sleep and much thought, Mark handed me a list over breakfast. It was detailed, outlining everything he thought needed to be addressed before and after the baby arrived. I looked over the list. Separate bedrooms after the baby's born, schedules for nighttime feedings, budget adjustments. And all this should have been done only by me. "Mark, this feels like it's just my baby, not ours," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Mark didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening. "Well, of the two of us, you want this baby the most, so it's fair." That day, I didn't just confront the reality of becoming a mother, but also the complexities of how it would impact my relationship with Mark. It was clear that while this baby was a part of us, the path forward wouldn't be without its challenges. As my pregnancy progressed, the atmosphere at home took on a subtle shift. I'd expected joy, or at least a growing sense of shared anticipation, but instead, there was an undertone of tension, particularly from Susan. It felt like every time I caught her eye, there was a flicker of something, discomfort, maybe even disapproval. One crisp evening, as the leaves started turning golden, I decided to address the elephant in the room. Susan was in the kitchen, meticulously peeling apples for a pie. The silence between us had grown too loud to ignore. "Can we talk?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, trying to keep my voice light. Susan glanced up, her hands pausing for a moment. About how things are with us, since the baby news," I said. Susan put down the peeler, wiped her hands, and sighed. "Jenna, it's nothing personal. I'm used to how things are around here." I nodded, understanding her more than she realized. "I get that, Susan. But things are going to change. It doesn't mean it has to be bad." Susan resumed her peeling, a bit more forcefully. "Changes aren't always for the better." As the weeks went on, Susan seemed to adjust to the idea of the baby. When my belly had obviously grown large, one afternoon she commented, "I'll be around to help with the baby. It'll be good having a little one in the house again." "That's great to hear, Susan," I said, a bit relieved, but then added, "It's a girl." The change in Susan's face was immediate and stark. "A girl," she repeated, her voice flat. "Yeah, a girl," I confirmed, feeling a sudden chill. Susan looked away, her voice cold. "I don't like girls." The air felt heavier, denser. "Well, she's still your granddaughter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Susan didn't respond, just continued with her cooking, and I knew that whatever semblance of peace we'd found was on shaky ground. As we moved through the weeks, Mark's demeanor also shifted. His work became busier, or so he said, leaving me alone most evenings and weekends. His absences were a stark contrast to the early days of our marriage, filled with long conversations and shared meals. Now, I was lucky if we spent a few hours together on Sundays. As my due date approached, I found myself often alone, wondering how our small, soon-to-be family could feel so disjointed. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the nursery we'd prepared, running my hands over the soft blankets, the tiny clothes. This room, filled with all the things a baby could need, felt like the only place that was ready for her arrival. The day Ava was born was the most transformative day of my life. After hours of labor, when I finally held her in my arms, all the pain melted away. It was just me and her, and the world seemed to pause. Bringing Ava home was supposed to be the start of a beautiful new chapter. But the reality was far from what I had envisioned. Mark was at the hospital for the birth, but his presence felt more obligatory than supportive. He held Ava briefly, then handed her back like he was afraid he might break her. "Mark, isn't she beautiful?" I said, looking up at him with our daughter in my arms. "Yeah, she's great," he replied, but his eyes were scanning emails on his phone. I tried to brush off his detachment, focusing instead on Ava and the new motherly duties that filled my days and nights. As the weeks passed, Mark's absences grew longer. He was either buried in work or out with friends. "I need some air, Jen. You've got everything covered here," he'd say, kissing my forehead before disappearing for hours. It was during one of his absences that Susan's true colors regarding Ava started to show. Initially, when we brought Ava home, Susan had seemed to soften slightly, watching me feed her or change her with something that almost looked like curiosity. But that changed one day when Ava wouldn't stop crying. I was rocking her, walking up and down the living room, utterly exhausted. Susan walked in, her expression sour. "Can't you make her stop? All this noise is giving me a headache," she snapped. I was too tired to argue. "I'm trying, Susan. She's just a baby, she doesn't understand." "Well, you need to do something. Maybe take her out for a walk or something. Get her out of the house," Susan suggested, but her tone was far from helpful. As the weeks turned into months, the situation at home grew tense. Ava's colic didn't improve, and with Mark hardly around and Susan's constant remarks, I felt more alone than ever. One particularly tough evening, when Ava had been fussing nonstop and Mark was out again, I reached my breaking point. I called Mark, the sound of Ava's cries echoing in the background as I spoke. "Mark, I need you to come home. Please, I can't do this alone tonight," I pleaded. There was a pause before he responded. "Jen, you know I have a lot on my plate right now. You're doing great with Ava. She'll tire herself out soon." I hung up, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. When he finally came home late that night, he found me asleep on the couch, Ava finally quiet in my arms. "Look, Jen, I'm trying here. But you wanted this, remember?" His words cut deep. I looked up at him, too tired to cry. Yes, I wanted Ava. But I wanted us to be a family, Mark. I can't be the only one trying. Mark didn't say anything, just walked off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sleeping baby. That morning, my home office was a disaster zone, papers everywhere, and my laptop screen filled with endless data. The deadline for my report was looming large, and stress was my constant companion. Ava, only a few months old, was unusually cranky, adding to the chaos. In desperation, I turned to Mark. "Can you watch Ava for a few hours? I really need to focus." Mark, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else but here, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and pointed at it. "Remember this? We agreed you'd handle Ava during the day." "I've got my own work, Jenna." I stared at him, feeling a surge of frustration. "It's just for a few hours, Mark. Can't you help out just this once?" He shook his head, unmoved, and turned back to his computer. Just then, Susan walked into the room, her expression unreadable. "I'll watch her," she said abruptly. I was taken aback, given her usual reluctance to involve herself with Ava. "Are you sure, Susan?" "Yes, go on. Get your work done." Grateful despite my reservations, I grabbed my things and headed to the office. The quiet there was a stark contrast to the tension at home. I buried myself in work, my mind only half on the financial analyses and forecasts. Hours later, drained from the mental exertion, I returned home. The house was silent. Too silent. In the living room, I found Susan watching TV, seemingly at ease. "Where's Ava?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's been sleeping quietly in her crib," Susan replied without turning to look at me. Surprised and relieved, I tiptoed to the nursery. There she was, Ava, looking peaceful in a way that she hadn't for days. It was a relief, but a part of me stirred with unease. She usually never slept this long without waking. I went back to my home office to catch up on more work, but as the night wore on, a nagging worry grew. Ava hadn't woken for her feeding, hadn't made a sound. Something wasn't right. Rushing back to the nursery, I reached for Ava, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ava, sweetie, wake up," I whispered. No response. Panic clawed at me. I scooped her up, feeling her too still, too quiet. "Ava!" I cried louder, hoping for any sign of awakening. Nothing. Mark heard the commotion and appeared at the door, annoyance etched on his face. "What's the problem?" "She's sleeping, isn't that what you wanted?" "She's not waking up, Mark. Something's wrong." My voice was sharp with fear. Susan came in behind him, her face set in a frown. "Stop being dramatic, Jenna. You're just overreacting." I held Ava closer, and that's when I smelled it, a faint but distinct odor of alcohol. "She smells like alcohol." "Why does she smell like alcohol?" I gasped, my heart racing. "You're imagining things," Susan snapped, her voice harsh. "Just lay her down and go rest." But I couldn't. I couldn't just lay her down. I dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. Every second felt like an eternity, waiting for the ambulance, clutching Ava, praying for her to stir. The moment the ambulance arrived, everything became a blur. The paramedics rushed into our home, and even Mark and Susan finally emerged from their rooms, their expressions unreadable. They silently watched as the paramedics worked on Ava, checking her vital signs and quickly assessing her condition. The urgency in their movements was terrifying. One of the paramedics called out as he lifted Ava carefully. "We need to move fast. She's unresponsive." As they wheeled her out on the stretcher, I followed, barely aware of my own feet moving. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Ava, their voices a mix of calm and urgency. I stood there, frozen, until one of them approached me holding a feeding bottle. "Is this what you've been feeding her?" the doctor asked, his tone serious. I took the bottle, my hand shaking. It was half full of a clear liquid. "No, this isn't milk. What is this?" My voice cracked as the realization hit me. The doctor's face was grim. "It's alcohol. It was in her crib. She's in critical condition because of it." Hearing those words, my legs gave out, and the room spun. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, a nurse hovering over me. "Where's Ava? How's my daughter?" I asked immediately, trying to sit up. "Take it easy," the nurse gently pushed me back down. "Your daughter is stable now. We've managed to clear the alcohol from her system. She's doing much better." As the nurse stepped out, a couple of social workers came in. Their expressions were somber as they introduced themselves. "We've been informed about the situation," one of them started. "It appears your mother-in-law was responsible for giving your daughter alcohol. She told us it was to help her sleep and not be a disturbance." I felt sick. The reality of Susan's actions was horrifying. She did this, on purpose? Yes, she admitted to diluting cognac and giving it to Ava. "We've already contacted the police. They're handling it from here," the other social worker added. As they spoke, memories flooded back, the stories Susan had told about her past, her daughter's tragic death. It hit me then, a chilling thought. Could this be how her own daughter died? "She always said her husband blamed her for their daughter's death," I muttered, half to myself. The social workers exchanged a look. "We'll make sure to mention this to the police. It could be relevant to their investigation." After they left, I lay back, exhausted and overwhelmed. My mind raced with what needed to be done next. It wasn't just about recovering from this nightmare, it was about protecting Ava from ever experiencing anything like this again. When Mark came to visit, his face pale, he looked like he was about to speak, but I cut him off. "How could you not see what was happening? She was under the same roof as us, Mark." I didn't know," he stammered, looking away. "I'm sorry. I should have been there more. I should have seen." "Sorry isn't enough, Mark, I want to get a divorce," I said firmly, my resolve hardening. It was about taking action, making sure our daughter never had to suffer like this again. After everything that happened, going back to the house I once shared with Mark was out of the question. Ava and I moved in with my parents for a while as I sorted things out. During that time, I filed for divorce. It was a tough decision, but necessary for our well-being. The court proceedings were draining. In the end, Susan was sentenced to a short term in prison. They could not prove Susan's guilt in her daughter's death, and had to pay a hefty financial compensation. Mark was ordered to pay child support. It wasn't about the money, though, it was about ensuring Ava's future was secure. A few months later, I bought an apartment. It was small, but it was ours, a sanctuary for Ava and me. We decorated it with bright colors and filled it with laughter and new memories. It was during this time of rebuilding our lives that I received an unexpected visitor. Mark's father, Greg, came by one afternoon. I hadn't seen much of him over the years, but he was always kind and had a gentle manner. His visit was a surprise, and honestly, a bit unsettling at first. "Jenna, I hope it's all right that I stopped by," he started, his hat in his hands, a nervous habit. "Of course, Greg. It's good to see you," I said, leading him into the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" As I brewed the coffee, Greg's purpose for visiting became clear. He wasn't just here to exchange pleasantries. "Jenna, there's something important I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy with seriousness. "Susan, she did the same thing to her that she did to Ava. I've always suspected it, but I couldn't prove anything." His confession stunned me. The patterns of the past mirroring the present were chilling. Greg's next words were unexpected. "I've decided to bequeath my estate to Ava. She deserves a secure future, one that's not overshadowed by the mistakes of her grandmother." I was taken aback by his generosity. "Greg, that's incredibly kind of you. Ava is lucky to have you." As Ava toddled into the room a few moments later, Greg's face lit up with a joy that was pure and heartfelt. Watching them together, I felt a sense of peace. Despite the turmoil, here was a bond that remained unbroken, a connection that could bring healing. With Greg's support and the new life Ava and I were building, the future looked brighter. I continued to work from home, balancing my career with being a full-time mom. Each day was filled with small achievements and large milestones, and I cherished them all. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I want to tell you about the time when my life took a surprising turn. I was 25 years old, working as an accountant at a company where I met Tom. Tom was the head of the marketing department, a pretty serious guy, but with a charm that was hard to miss. At first, Tom and I were just colleagues. We exchanged polite hellos and discussed work stuff now and then. He was always busy, and I was too focused on my tasks to think much about him. But things changed at one of our company parties. It was one of those annual events where everyone let loose a little. The party was lively, with music blasting and people dancing everywhere. I wasn't much of a dancer, so I decided to take a break on the balcony, away from the noise. That's when Tom joined me. We chatted for a bit about work and the usual small talk. I noticed how his serious demeanor from the office melted away into a more relaxed and friendly vibe. We started talking about our lives outside work, our interests, and what we liked to do for fun. "So, what do you do for fun, Tom? I can't imagine you being anything but serious," I teased. He laughed. "Well, I enjoy hiking and playing the guitar. I guess I'm not all work and no play after all." As the conversation flowed, there was a moment of silence. We looked at each other, and without thinking, we leaned in and kissed. It was spontaneous, unexpected, but it felt natural. Pulling back slightly, Tom looked a bit surprised. "Wow, I didn't see that coming," he said, a bit breathless. "Me neither," I admitted, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "But it felt right, didn't it?" "Yeah, it did," he agreed, smiling. The next day at work, there was a different energy between us. We started spending more time together, having lunch, and going for coffee breaks. Our first date was simple yet perfect. We went to a cozy little restaurant downtown. We talked for hours about everything, our childhood, our dreams, our fears. It felt like we had known each other forever. 2 years flew by, filled with countless memories and shared moments. One day, Tom suggested we take a trip to Hawaii. I was thrilled. Little did I know, he had something big planned. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun set on the beautiful beach, Tom got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. "Hannah, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" I was overwhelmed with emotion. "Yes, Tom, I will," I said, tears of joy streaming down my face. We returned home, and the preparations for our wedding began. It was a whirlwind of excitement and planning. Tom introduced me to his parents, Nancy and John. They were a kind and welcoming couple, and I felt instantly at ease with them. We had a simple wedding, but filled with lots of laughter and joy, especially thanks to Tom's huge, fun-loving family. I never knew he had so many relatives who loved to party. After the wedding, Tom moved into my house, the one I inherited from my grandfather. It wasn't huge, but it was cozy, and I loved it. Tom insisted I become a housewife, and after thinking it over, I agreed. The idea of taking care of our home and spending more time with Tom sounded nice. The first 6 months of our marriage were like a dream. We were inseparable, spending every moment together. We'd go for long walks, binge watch our favorite shows, and just enjoy each other's company. The house felt so peaceful, and I loved making it our own little nest. Tom's parents, Nancy and John, started visiting us more often. They'd drop by unannounced, but I didn't mind too much at first. It was nice having them around, and they seemed to enjoy our company too. They often talked about their small rented apartment and how cramped it was. One evening, while we were having dinner, Nancy sighed heavily. "I just wish we had more space, you know? That apartment is just so tiny." John nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's getting a bit claustrophobic." I tried to be sympathetic. "I'm sure it's not that bad. At least you have each other, right?" They laughed, but I could tell they weren't entirely happy with their living situation. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on enjoying my life with Tom. As the weeks went by, Tom's parents continued to visit frequently. They'd stay for dinner and often hinted about how nice it would be to live in a bigger place. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the positive aspects of our time together. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, Nancy dropped by unexpectedly. "Hi Hannah, I thought I'd keep you company while you cook." "Sure, Nancy. I could use the company," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She wandered around the kitchen, looking at everything. "You know, this house is really nice. So much space and so cozy." "Thanks, Nancy. I really love it here." She sighed again. "Our place is just so small. It's hard to even move around sometimes." I felt a bit uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I didn't want to be rude. After all, they were Tom's parents, and I wanted to keep the peace. As the months passed, I noticed Tom was spending more time talking about his parents and their living situation. He'd bring it up during our dinners and casual conversations. "Hannah, my parents really struggle in that tiny apartment. It's not fair for them, you know?" "I get it, Tom. But they seem to manage, right?" "Yeah, but still, I wish there was more we could do for them." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. I wanted to support Tom, but I also didn't want to disrupt the peace and comfort of our home. I hoped things would just work themselves out. One day, Tom came home and casually said, "Hannah, my parents need to stay with us for a couple of weeks. Their apartment is getting renovated." I blinked, a bit taken aback, but wanting to be supportive. "All right, Tom, I guess we can handle that," I replied, trying to stay positive. I figured I could get along with Nancy and John, since they seemed nice enough. A few days later, I saw a massive truck pull up outside our house. Movers started unloading a ton of furniture and boxes. I stood there, watching in disbelief as they filled our house with their stuff. "What's all this?" I muttered to myself, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Nancy and John arrived soon after, looking cheerful. "Thanks for letting us stay, Hannah," Nancy said, patting me on the shoulder. I forced a smile. "Sure, but why didn't you rent a storage room for all this stuff?" Nancy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I don't trust strangers with my things. It's just for a couple of weeks." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. For the first few days, they were polite and thanked me for letting them stay. I even started to relax a bit, thinking maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. Tom suggested we have a family dinner to welcome them properly. I agreed, thinking it might help ease the tension. The night of the dinner, I worked hard to make everything perfect. I cooked a nice meal and set the table nicely. As we all sat down, Nancy and John seemed pleased. "Thank you, Hannah, this is lovely," Nancy said, smiling. I smiled back, feeling a bit more at ease. "I'm glad you like it. Welcome to our home." The dinner went smoothly, with everyone chatting and laughing. I started to think maybe this arrangement could work after all. Tom's parents seemed grateful, and I hoped we could all get along well during their stay. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being overwhelmed by all their stuff crowding our house. Every room seemed to be filled with their belongings, and it felt like our space was shrinking. I tried to stay positive, reminding myself it was only for a few weeks. Despite the growing clutter, I continued to focus on keeping the peace. I cleaned up after them, cooked their meals, and tried to be a good hostess. Tom seemed pleased with how things were going, which helped me stay positive. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Tom came into the kitchen. "Hannah, thanks for making this work. I know it's not easy having my parents here." I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled at him. "I'm doing my best, Tom. I just hope it's only for a couple of weeks like you said." "It will be, I promise," he assured me. I nodded, feeling a bit reassured. I hoped Tom was right and that this arrangement would be temporary. I could handle a few weeks, I told myself. As the days passed, I tried to focus on the positives. Nancy and John were generally polite and tried to be helpful in their own way. We had a few more family dinners, and I made an effort to include them in our daily routines. One morning, I decided to take a break from the house and go for a walk. I needed some fresh air and a bit of time to myself. As I walked around the neighborhood, I thought about how much our lives had changed in just a few days. When I got back home, Nancy was in the kitchen, making coffee. "Morning, Hannah. How was your walk?" "It was nice, thanks," I replied, feeling a bit more refreshed. She smiled. "Good. I'm thinking of baking some cookies later. Would you like some?" I appreciated the gesture. "Sure, that sounds great, Nancy." As I went about my day, I reminded myself that this was just a temporary situation. I could handle a few weeks of extra company and clutter. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. Things took a turn after a few days of my in-laws moving in. It started slowly, but soon became clear that Nancy and John were taking over our house. It began one morning when I was making breakfast. Nancy walked into the kitchen and wrinkled her nose at the spread. "Hannah, what's this? Oatmeal again? We need some real food. Bacon and eggs would be nice." I clenched my jaw, but nodded. "Fine, I'll make bacon and eggs tomorrow." The next day, I found Nancy in the living room, moving my favorite chair. "This recliner needs a better spot. Don't you think, Hannah?" I tried to keep my cool. "Nancy, please ask before moving my furniture." She just shrugged. "It's for the best, trust me." John wasn't any better. He'd park himself in front of the TV all day, snacking and leaving crumbs everywhere. I confronted him one evening. "John, can you at least use a plate? The living room's a mess." He grunted without looking away from the screen. "Yeah, sure, whatever." I felt like I was losing control of my own home. Every day, Nancy would find something new to criticize or change. One afternoon, I caught her rearranging the kitchen cabinets. "Nancy, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Oh, just organizing things better. Your system is a bit chaotic." It was getting harder to keep my patience. I talked to Tom about it that evening. "Tom, your parents are taking over. They're changing everything and making a mess." He sighed, looking annoyed. "Hannah, they're just trying to help. Can't you just let it go?" I couldn't believe his attitude. It was like he didn't care about how I felt. I decided to try and manage things on my own, hoping they'd eventually leave as promised. The next morning, Nancy decided to critique my cleaning. "Hannah, this house is dusty. Can't you do a better job?" I bit back my frustration. "I clean every day, Nancy. Maybe you could help out?" "Help out? I'm a guest here, remember?" I walked away before I said something I'd regret. I was feeling more like a maid than a hostess. John was no help either. He'd leave dirty dishes everywhere, expecting me to clean up after him. One day, I found Nancy going through my closet. what are you doing in here? She didn't even look guilty. Just seeing if you have something I can borrow. We're about the same size. Nancy, you can't just go through my things. Ask first. She huffed and walked out, muttering under her breath. I felt like I was losing my mind. Tom's lack of support made it even worse. Every time I brought up an issue, he'd brush it off. The next morning, Nancy announced she was going to redecorate the guest bedroom. I think this room needs a new look. I'll bring in some new curtains and a bedspread. I stared at her, incredulous. Nancy, this is my house. You can't just change everything without asking. We're just trying to make it more comfortable, Hannah. You should be grateful. I felt a wave of anger and frustration, but decided to walk away. I needed to find a way to regain control of my home and my life. I hoped Tom would eventually see reason, but I wasn't holding my breath. Things had gone from bad to worse. Nancy, my mother-in-law, started taking my bank card without even asking. One day, I noticed charges on my account that I didn't make. It was Nancy, buying things for herself. I confronted her about it. Nancy, you took my card without asking. You can't do that. She looked at me, unbothered. Hannah, we needed a few things. What's the big deal? It's my card, Nancy. You need to ask first. She shrugged and walked away, leaving me fuming. I decided to talk to Tom about it, hoping he'd back me up. Tom, your mom's been using my bank card without asking. This has to stop, I told him that evening. He barely looked up from his phone. Hannah, it's just some groceries and stuff. She can use it, we live off my income anyway. I walked away, feeling defeated. It was clear Tom wasn't going to support me. I felt like I was losing control of my own finances, let alone my house. A month passed, and there was no sign of Nancy and John leaving. Every day felt like a struggle to maintain some sense of normalcy. They were constantly going through my things, rearranging the house, and demanding specific meals. One evening, during dinner, I decided to bring up the topic. Nancy, John, when do you think you'll be heading back to your apartment? They both laughed, and I looked at them, confused. Tom finally spoke up, Hannah, they're staying here indefinitely. I don't have the money to rent them a separate place right now. I stared at him in disbelief. What? Indefinitely? Tom, we didn't agree on this. They're my parents, Hannah. They need a place to stay. I felt a wave of depression wash over me. This wasn't what I signed up for. Now I was stuck serving my in-laws, who acted like they owned the place. The kitchen was another battleground. Nancy had specific demands for meals and wasn't shy about making them known. Hannah, I want roast beef for dinner tonight. Make sure it's done right, she instructed one morning. I bit my tongue, trying to stay calm. I'll see what I can do, Nancy. Every day felt like a struggle to keep my sanity. Tom was no help, constantly siding with his parents. I felt trapped in my own home, forced to cater to people who treated me like a servant. One evening, I decided I'd had enough. I needed to confront Tom and make him understand how miserable I was. Tom, this can't go on. Your parents are treating me like a servant, and it needs to stop, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. He shook his head. You're overreacting. Just deal with it. I felt tears of frustration welling up, but held them back. It was clear Tom wasn't going to change his stance. I knew I had to find a way to stand up for myself and take back control of my life. As the days went on, I tried to set firmer boundaries with Nancy and John, but it felt like a losing battle. They continued to overstep, and Tom continued to defend them. So, one day I went for a run to clear my head and ended up taking a nasty fall. I broke my leg and some good Samaritans called an ambulance for me. After a long day at the hospital, I finally got back home in a taxi, exhausted and in pain. When I hobbled through the door on crutches, Nancy and John were sitting in the living room, watching TV. Tom was there too, looking annoyed. Nancy glanced up and said, Where's dinner, Hannah? We had to order pizza. I pointed to my leg, still throbbing with pain. I broke my leg. I couldn't cook. Tom chimed in, clearly irritated. Hannah, stop pretending. You can still cook. Pretending? I was at the hospital all day, Tom. I shouted, feeling the frustration boiling over. No need to get dramatic, Nancy said, turning back to the TV. I was forced to cook dinner on crutches the next day. It was a struggle, but I managed to get something on the table. Nancy and John still found reasons to complain. A few days later, we were having dinner when Nancy dropped another bombshell. We've invited our relatives over for Thanksgiving. Since you're laid up with that leg, you should move out for a couple of weeks. They'll need the space. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to leave my own house? John nodded. It's just for a couple of weeks, Hannah. You'll be in the way with that leg. Tom just sat there, not saying a word. I looked at him, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. You can't be serious, I said, feeling my patience snap. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. Nancy crossed her arms, looking defiant. We've already told them they can stay here. I felt a surge of anger. You had no right to do that. This is my home, not yours. Tom finally spoke up. Hannah, just do it. It's only temporary. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You expect me to leave my house so your relatives can stay here? With my broken leg? You're being difficult, Hannah, Nancy said, her voice cold. I felt my blood boil, but then a strange calm washed over me. I smiled, feeling a surge of strength. No, Nancy, you get out of my house. Tom exploded. Hannah, you're a freeloader. You live off my money. If you don't do what my parents say, I'll divorce you. I kept my smile, feeling a strange sense of relief. Fine, Tom. I agree to the divorce. He looked shocked, clearly not expecting that. You'll regret this, Hannah. I stood up, steadying myself on my crutches. No, Tom. I'm done with all of you. Pack your things and get out. Tom stormed out of the room, fuming. He called the movers right then and there, and within a few hours, they were loading up the truck with their stuff. I watched them, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. I couldn't believe it had come to this, but I knew it was the right thing to do. They drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my leg throbbing but my heart feeling lighter. The next morning, I wasted no time. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. I wanted no chance of them coming back. With the new locks in place, I started cleaning the house, hobbling around on my crutches. My leg was healing slowly, but I was determined to get rid of every reminder of Tom and his parents. I gathered their leftover belongings, packed them into boxes, and put them by the door for donation. It was hard work, and I had to take frequent breaks, but each time I sat down, I felt a bit more at peace. I went through each room, removing anything that reminded me of them. I wanted my house to feel like mine again, free from the chaos they had brought into my life. Just when I thought I'd finally have some peace, something unbelievable happened. I was getting ready to spend Thanksgiving alone, looking forward to a quiet day. I had just put a pie in the oven when there was a loud knock on the door. I hobbled over to the door, still a bit sore from my leg injury. When I opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. There stood Tom, Nancy, and a bunch of their relatives, all looking way too cheerful. Happy Thanksgiving, Hannah, Tom said with a big grin. I stared at them, stunned. What are you doing here? Nancy waved a key at me, looking annoyed. We couldn't get in. Why did you change the locks? I took a deep breath, feeling my anger rise. Because you're not welcome here anymore. I changed the locks, because you're strangers to me now. Tom laughed, clearly not taking me seriously. Come on, Hannah. I earn the money here. You can't just kick us out. I couldn't help but laugh too, but it was a bitter laugh. Tom, I've got savings from my grandfather. I don't need your money. I can take care of myself. Nancy's eyes lit up when she heard about the money. "Oh, well, we came to make peace, Hannah. We should all live together as a family." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm. "No, Nancy. I don't consider you my family anymore." Tom looked shocked, still not believing I was serious. "You're really going to do this, Hannah?" I nodded and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared. "Yes, Tom. Here are the divorce papers. I'm done." Nancy tried to push past me. "Hannah, let's talk about this inside." I stepped in front of her, blocking the doorway. "No, you're not coming in. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." They all stared at me, completely stunned. Tom tried one last time. "Hannah, don't do this. Let's talk calmly." I shook my head. "No, Tom. I'm finally doing what's right for me. Now leave." They muttered and scowled, but they finally turned and left, throwing insults over their shoulders, calling me cruel and arrogant. I watched them go, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It was over. I had stood up for myself and taken control of my life. As the days passed, I focused on healing and rebuilding my home. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Tom and his family, creating a space that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, but every step I took made me feel stronger and more in control. I reconnected with friends, started new hobbies, and slowly built a new routine that made me happy. I was no longer living in fear or frustration. I had my peace, my home, and my life back.